Ballers, we are off to the divisional round of the NFL playoffs, and if you came looking for some starts and sits for your playoff contests, well then you've come to the right places. I am dropping some NFC stats and facts regarding those lineups to help you get the perfect lineup this week. We're going to talk about the Packers at San Francisco Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern. Right now, the 49ers, they are 10-point favorites, and that over-under is set at 50. Get your popcorn ready. This game right here is projected to be the highest scoring game of the divisional round. We know the 49ers. We know with all their weapons, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Brock Purdy, these guys, they are Super Bowl favorites, and they could pop off at any time. But Jordan Love, he is able to sling the ball around the field with the best of them. And this Packers team, they could stay within striking distance because of what Jordan Love is able to do. In a one-and-done format here, I love myself some Jordan Love as my starting quarterback this week. The 49ers, they finished the last month of the regular season allowing 17 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. And Love has produced 17 or more fantasy points in 9 of his last 10 contests, including a 274-yard, 3-touchdown performance against the Dallas Cowboys defense that was top 10 when it came to fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position. If I'm all in on Jordan Love, then you know I'm in on these pass catchers here for the Green Bay Packers too. It's just a little bit more difficult to predict who is going to emerge week in and week out. Dontavian Wicks caught another touchdown pass, giving him 4 over his last 3 games. So if you're looking for a cheap option there, especially when we're talking about, say, DFS lineups, Dontavian Wicks, he can save you a few bucks and give you some production too. Romeo Doubs, he was basically in the hospital just 2 weeks ago before going off to Dallas and catching 151 yards on those 6 receptions there, not to mention that touchdown. Doubs, 5 catches greater than 15 yards. That was a very Puka Nacua-esque type performance there. Last week's numbers, they don't show it, but Jaden Reed is still the Packers' number 1 wide receiver, facing a 49ers secondary that allowed the 11th most, 35.4 fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. This gives me hope for a bounce back week, along with Christian Watson there, who did not get hurt last week, so that's a positive right there. He's getting healthier and healthier each and every week, and this Packers pass catching core here, these wide receivers, this is one of the best units that nobody's talking about. I fully expect the Packers to throw early and often and have success in doing so. As for Aaron Jones and the Packers tight end duo of Tyler Kraft and Luke Musgrave, I like Jones in the passing game more than I like him in the run game, as the 49ers allowed the 4th fewest fantasy points this season to running backs. Then, when you have linebackers like Fred Warner and Drew Greenlaw out there, it is hard to find any kind of fantasy production coming out of the tight end position. It's going to be tough sledding out there for both these tight ends. Why is it tough? Well, look at, hey, the numbers don't lie. San Francisco, the 4th fewest fantasy points to tight ends this season, allowing less than 10 fantasy points per game. That's a hard fade for me. As for the 49ers, if you desire to do so, you can start any one of their playmakers, as the Packers basically sit in the middle of the pack in just about every fantasy category there when it comes to position by position for fantasy production, including ranking 20th in fantasy points per game allowed against running backs. Like Christian McCaffrey needed a favorable schedule to pop off here, right? McCaffrey is going to produce. You can start him each and every week, but I'm telling you, hold off, at least for now. The only reason I hesitate in starting any 49ers for fantasy is to save them for next week or possibly the Super Bowl, especially when we're talking about these playoff contests. It is essential to predict the outcomes ahead of time and hope that you are right. And in this case, I feel more confident in the 49ers winning than I am in predicting the outcome of the Lions and Buccaneers. So again, feel confident in starting any of these 49ers playmakers here. It's going to be a high-scoring affair. I'm just saying, save those playmakers for another day. You may need them. As for the Buccaneers and Lions, they kick off Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern, with the Lions as current 6-point favorites and that over-under at 48.5. In fantasy football, we let the singers sing, we let the dancers dance, and, well, we let the bakers bake, as Mayfield did last week, throwing for 337 yards and 3 touchdowns against Eagles, and crazier yet, only 48 yards ended up going to Mike Evans. Now, I am happy for Lions fans to get their first playoff win since 1991 in that 24-23 victory over the Rams. Detroit, they are committed to stopping the run this season, allowing just 1,028 rushing yards and 9 rushing touchdowns, not to mention a league best 15.67 fantasy points per game. This is coming off the heels of limiting Kyren Williams to just 70 total yards last week. But with the Bucks' run defense ranking top 4 along with the Lions and the 49ers, and the thought that you're going to hold on to Christian McCaffrey for at least a week or two, this would make you think that your options are rather limited at running back. But Rachaad White, he offers some upside in his pass catching ability that gives him the advantage over the field. White's pass catching, it wasn't needed last week in that blowout victory over the Eagles, but White, he finished third amongst backs there with 549 receiving yards, fourth in receptions with 64, and ninth in targets with 70. So even if the Lions stop the run, there's a good chance White is going to be involved elsewhere. And as good as the Lions have been when it comes to stopping the run, they have been bad when it comes to defending opposing wide receivers. Last week, it was Puka Nacua who turned 10 targets into 181 yards, which works out to about 20.1 yards per reception. Tampa, they have a pair of 1,000-yard receivers in Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, who just missed out on a 46-yard passing touchdown from Baker Mayfield in the first quarter of last week's contest. Both these wide receivers, you have to believe, are licking their chops knowing they are facing a secondary here in Detroit that allowed more than 3,000 yards receiving, 22 touchdowns, 2 receivers, and we're talking about 39.86 fantasy points per game. I have no problem right now in firing up both Buccaneers wide receivers in those playoff contests, considering how poor the weather is in the AFC and my desire to hold on to those 49ers players for a little bit later. So you are starting Evans, you're starting Godwin. White, he's a tough matchup. He's a pass-catching back that makes him one of the best options this week. So you know a 4,000-yard passer in Baker Mayfield is a must-start as well. After all, the Lions did allow the 5th most fantasy points this season to opposing signal callers. Matthew Stafford, he just torched his former team and this Lions secondary for a pair of touchdowns and 367 yards. I don't see how that changes this week. Detroit is also allowing over 13 fantasy points to tight ends, so wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Cade Otton is strong as well. Now, I mentioned that the Bucs' stellar run defense was right on par with the Lions this season, as they are allowing the 3rd fewest fantasy points to backs at 17.48. But just like the Lions, their pass defense has struggled at times, even with All-Pro Antoine Winfield back there. Tampa Bay, they are allowing the 2nd most fantasy points at 14.73 to tight ends this season, and at 36.06 fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, that happens to be the 9th most in that department as well. What does that mean? It means that we get another look at the Rams versus Lions from just a week ago, except the Bucs, they're playing the part of Los Angeles in this one. Meanwhile, while you're starting Mayfield, Evans, Godwin, and Otton, you can also feel good about starting Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Sam Laporta, and do it with confidence. But once again, expectations should be held a little bit here once again when it comes to David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs because of how good this Bucs run defense has been. Now, if you're like me and you have the 49ers knocking out the Packers, then it is important that we predict the winner of this contest, because whoever advances, you can feel confident in starting their passing attack again next week against San Francisco. Guess wrong, in that player pool, it's going to diminish. I do like the Lions this week, so I will be holding on to Goff and company and going with Mayfield or Love, along with a combination of Aaron Jones, Rachaad White, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, and Jayden Reed when looking at the NFC this week in an attempt to play the long game. As always, this video, it is being recorded on Tuesday here, so if you want to play the long game, make sure you are subscribed to the Rotoballer YouTube channel and head over to rotoballer.com and the Rotoballer Discord channel for all the latest news and fantasy analysis. See you next time.